The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame.
Welcome back to The Short Game, the show about short video games, games that respect your time. I am Raygan Kelly, and I am joined this week by my one and only bro host,
Shane Kelly.
And this week we are talking about Annapurna's new hit game, 12 Minutes.
You know, I just want to take a second and acknowledge the fact that it's just you and me, just two bros.
Yep.
Me and my twin brother, and I always enjoy these kinds of episodes because you and me, when it's just us.
Welcome back to The Short Game. This is the show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and this week we're talking about Annapurna's new hit game, 12 Minutes.
Wait, what just happened?
Welcome back to The Short Game. This is the show about short video games, games that respect your time.
Oh no, the show is restarting every time I leave 10 seconds of dead air.
This is
okay. You know what's really funny is I had a conversation with my friend Phil talking about getting into this episode and like what we were going to talk about because I kind of recommended the game to him. And here's the thing, like he told me I should make that exact same joke. So maybe I told you about it in a previous loop. I don't know.
It's honestly the most obvious lazy joke ever, but hey, I did it. I'm not editing it out. Listeners, you're welcome. We're talking about 12 Minutes, which is a game from developer Luis Antonio and produced or published by Annapurna Interactive. And this is a game that's had a lot of mixed reception, and I think we're probably a bit mixed on it here on the show. So I'm kind of looking forward to chatting about it because I liked some things about it, but I think it's actually... We've had a couple of these lately. I think this is a bad game. I think this is a really bad game. Like a really, really bad one. But there's some still redeeming qualities here too.
I mean, maybe this isn't my favorite game of all time, but I think I am going to have to be in the position of defending this game because not only are you saying you think it's just genuinely a bad game, several reviewers that I respect have basically said, don't play this.
I think it's bad art. I think it's bad art. This is bad art. But yes.
For me, I personally did enjoy it. I like this game. Maybe it's not my favorite. So I'm going to be in the position, I guess, of defending it.
Shane, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, me too. I mean, otherwise it would just be you on a podcast. Am I really here? Am I? All right. So, but one thing I'll say, first thing right off the bat, I love it when developers put their name on their game. You know, when I look up a game and I'm like, okay, this is a game by, the Disappearing Bear, or whatever cutesy name you've come up with for your development studio, that's cool and all, but when the game just says this is by Luis Antonio and like this is someone who has a real perspective and has a this is someone who has made a game and stamped their name on it and said this is what I wanted to make, I respect that a lot.
Yeah, and that's also not to say that this is a game by a totally solo developer. This has been in development a really, really long time. So this is one of the interesting things about this is that this game has been being shown to press in various forms since something like 2015, like a really long time. I've seen previews of this game that were like partial playthroughs with press, playing demos of this game in forms that looked entirely different art, and yet basically the same story and structure as far back as like 2015, and is not a solo development effort. It seemingly started as this sort of small solo project that gained a lot of hype on that sort of initial sort of press interaction. This showed well at, I think, like PAXs and things like that. I don't know for sure, but showed well in demos a long time ago, and then got an influx of, I believe, money from Annapurna, and has been in continual development since. It's got, if you look up the credits, it's got a number of character artists and environment artists and animators and motion capture people. And
well, you have to do that in order to make something as polished as this is. And this is... Look, you're laughing, but this is a game that does some very technically difficult things.
Okay, fair enough. But polished is not what I would have called this. We'll get into the specifics there. But the other thing I was going to mention is that part of the pitch on this game is that this is a star-studded game. This is a game that has basically three main characters, and they are played by James McAvoy, Daisy Ridley, and Willem Dafoe. You can hardly get more star-studded voice cast than that. And they are all doing, I think, reasonably good voice acting. One of the things that is pretty good about this game, Daisy Ridley, I think, owns in this. She's doing a great job. Willem Dafoe is being Willem Dafoe, and that's why you hire him, and he sounds exactly like himself. And James McAvoy sort of disappears into the role. I didn't even recognize his voice. He's just there. He's James McAvoy, white man guy. But it's still great cast.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw I love Willem Dafoe. I'm a lifetime fan of Willem Dafoe. I think maybe the last time I saw him in a game was Beyond Two Souls, which is something I would love for us to cover on this podcast one day.
What are you trying to do to me, Shane? You're bringing me 12 minutes, and then you're trying to get me to do a what's his name, David Cage, like in the same breath? You trying to kill me?
I think there are maybe even some similarities between this. And
I think you're right. Game. I think you're right. This is yeah. So yeah.
They both kind of stylistically want to lean into the same sort of thriller / detective fiction subgenre. Mm-hmm. And this
and they both don't know how to do that in the format of a video game.
I think this does it better.
You're probably right. You're probably right. Okay, we need to talk about how this game works before I continue shitting on it and you continue telling me that I'm being too harsh, which I probably am. So
I don't know if I think you're being too harsh. I think you're having obviously a very ordinary is maybe the wrong word. But I think your reaction to this game is echoed by lots and lots of game reviewers who I respect. So and I don't totally disagree about it, but I do think that that reaction kind of loses some of what this kind of just is a reaction to what this game is trying to do in the first place, which I think is really wrapped up in the genre that it's trying to do, which is not a genre that games I think do particularly well. And I don't even know if the kind of structure that this game is trying to do does it particularly well. It certainly does something that's interesting and new, but what it's trying to do, I think, is a psychological thriller in a
point-and-click adventure game format.
In a point-and-click adventure game format, which it's hard for me to say if I've even seen that before. So before we get into maybe why people are having this really strong reaction, and I guess I'll give the warning up front. The reason that people have, I think, the reaction that they're having to this game is that they feel like it has a treatment of violence that they don't really enjoy from this kind of game. Now, violence in games is yet another metaphorical can of worms that I'm not quite sure I want to open right now. But this is a game that treats its violence very differently from violent video games that you would see under that heading.
Actually, I want to step in for a second and say that that is one aspect of why I disliked this game, and it's a significant one, but it's not even the main issues that I have with this game. So, yes, and
yeah. So before we get into what that whole conversation, which I'm looking forward to, let's share a little bit more about what this game is. In structure, this game is a point-and-click adventure game. And I am generally the person on this podcast who is asked to play point-and-click adventure games, and I loved them. I have loved many of them. But in general, when they get brought up as a potential game, I am the one who pushes back on them. But because I don't really like playing them much anymore. I have Monkey Island out. And nothing that tries to be funny. Most of them try to be funny, and none of them are really all that funny. None of them are certainly as funny as Monkey Island. And I couldn't even do all the Monkey Islands. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from on that. But let's talk about this game 12 minutes. You are this husband who is kind of coming home to a romantic evening with your wife, and a series of events unfold that are pretty horrific. And the story is structured around a Groundhog Day style time loop. The name of the game being 12 minutes tells you exactly what you need to know about this game. I think it's a great title. Mm-hmm. And I am, on a personal level, I was very drawn to this game because time loops in fiction are one of my favorite tropes. I really loved Groundhog Day.
Absolutely.
I am the person who spent way too much time thinking about the metaphysical implications of Groundhog Day. So,
yeah.
So, and we have just come off of a string. We have a history of loving that on this podcast. I pushed for us to play The Forgotten City because I heard, this is a game that's like ancient Roman underground Groundhog Day.
Dear listeners, if you are considering playing 12 minutes and you have instead the opportunity to play The Forgotten City, like if you're itching to play a time loop game, number one time loop game of the year goes to Forgotten City. Let me tell you.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah,
that's a great
no
game.
Question.
And there are things that this game could stand to gain from that. And I think in general, time loops in media is a much more interesting conversation. So I'm not pulling back on it than talking about this game. But there are a lot of really popular movies, like for example, Edge of Tomorrow, which is I know one of Raygan's favorite movies of all time.
God.
And that movie took a lot of lessons from video games. It's basically the concept of restarting frequently to see what happens if you learn from your mistakes and do things differently. It wasn't in the original Groundhog Day something that was tied to the idea of video games, but I think thematically today it's something that's very much tied to the idea of video games. People think, what happens if I save and reload?
It's almost trite to say, but every game has that. Mario is a time loop game because you die in the middle, you die to that Goomba in 1-1 and you're back at the beginning. And Mario knows that there's a Goomba there now. And that's what this game is too. This is James McAvoy comes home to his loving wife, gets hit by the Goomba, dies, and he's back at the beginning of 1-1 again. And that's this story. But this in particular it's the worst night of your life. You are playing
Princess Peach, it's a me. The day is restarting every time I fall out of the hole in the bottom of the level.
No. Oh my God. Somebody needs to make that now if that's not a fan game. That would be
somebody's done it.
12 minutes the 12 minutes the Mario fan game. So the setup, and with every good time loop, the initial loop, obviously you're playing ignorant of what's going to happen, and that first loop is sort of what defines the tone and the events of the rest of the game. So to begin with, you come home to this tiny apartment. At some point we need to talk about the weird layout of the apartment. This is the strangest. This game has a weird perspective and it has an extremely strange setting. But you come home to this tiny apartment. Your wife has made a special dessert. She sits you down at the table and tells you that, she gives you a gift. The gift is a onesie. She is telling you that she is pregnant with your baby, of course. And then roughly around that time, there's a knock at the door. It is Willem Dafoe. And Willem Dafoe tells you he's a police officer, and he, if you let him in, he comes into your house, or he'll break down the door if you don't, and he'll come in and knocks your wife to the ground and puts her in zip tie style handcuffs, then does the same to you, and then proceeds to ask her a bunch of questions about her father, basically accuses her of killing her father, and then murders you both, or at the very least knocks you out, because this day resets if you are killed, if you try to leave the apartment, or if you're knocked unconscious. And you are the easiest person in the world to knock unconscious. One hit from this cop and you go down. So the early sort of possibility space of this game is, first of all, trying to figure out what's going on in some more detail. So when you come back in loop number 2, you can do things like question your wife about her father that she is supposedly meant to have killed. You can search the apartment for clues that might be related to that. You can see if there's any way to prevent the cop from getting in, or see if there's a way to prevent him from killing you if he does, etc. But even if you do one of those things, you're on a 12-minute time limit. And at the end of the 12 minutes of your evening, the day will reset, even if you have not been knocked unconscious or killed. And this is a mystery game. So the initial mystery spins out into several further questions. But the initial mystery is, why is this police officer, purportedly, breaking into my home to assault my wife and I? And, what is the backstory there? And once you discover that, there's significant further mysteries that need to be... what is the word for resolving a mystery? Solved. That's the word that I was looking for.
In general, and when I am defending this game, because I again feel like I'm in the position of the guy who liked the thing that everyone is saying they didn't like. What I am saying I like here is the way that it is playing in what I feel like is one of the two genres that it is trying to do. And so it is trying to do two different things. It is trying to do the kind of time loop fiction subgenre / trope, right? It is a Groundhog Day alike, and it is trying to do psychological horror. And those are two things that I absolutely love, and two things that I was desperately curious to see how well they would mesh. And the answer is maybe not all that well. But I am very, very glad to see those two things put together. So first off, before I get into the what I like there, I want to talk about what I think this game is trying to do, because it does a pretty damn good job with some of the time loop elements, and then I feel like maybe misses the mark on some of the psychological horror elements. So, and I think maybe that is where a lot of people are thinking it maybe missed the mark more broadly. In the copy about this game, when they say, okay, what is this game from the developer, they call it an interactive narrative that blends the dreamlike suspense of The Shining with the claustrophobia of Rear Window and the fragmented structure of Memento.
Okay,
I want to kind of break that
before you
down
go any farther, I got to interrupt, because I have to say this game is so up its own ass. It is like all up into its own colon on this. Like that is a description that is, it is inconceivable to me that a person sat down, pen to paper, and wrote the script for this work and thought he was going to make that he was making something that wasn't even remotely comparable to any of those pieces that were just discussed. This game is nothing like The Shining. There is not a scent of Shining in this, apart from the obvious Shining carpeting reference on the intro hallway that you walk over, and I thought, oh, the carpet from The Shining. Never thought about The Shining again. Rear Window, okay, it's claustrophobic, I guess, but that's not what made Rear Window. It's not Rear Window because it took place in a small apartment. It was Rear Window because it was Hitchcock, and there's not a hint of Hitchcock in this. And then Memento, this has a fragmentary structure because it is a time loop, not because it is well made or made in an interesting structure. It has the only structure that potentially could work for a time loop video game, which is to say that it is repeating the same. It's bizarre.
Well, it's okay, because I was about to interrupt you anyway. Because as is often the case when you and I are both on the podcast by ourselves. We have no third party. And I feel at least somewhat entitled to interrupt you more. You have interrupted me trying to make a point about
I have. Please proceed.
About something that I literally brought up.
I was just so offended.
Tried to make
Please
my point for me. And I think done it badly, which is, I think listeners,
why don't you Shane,
airing of grievances. But
fair enough. Shane, do you want me to edit that out? I'll go ahead and let you take the whole piece again.
I think our listeners are entitled to some of our twin drama on an episode that's just you and me. But so let me talk about this sentence, because here is why this kind of sentence gets written. Like, this is ad copy for the game, right? So when you're creating your ad copy, you're trying to give comparables, right? And like a good comparable in your elevator pitch is to say, like, it's this meets that, right? And this is them trying to do that. And I definitely think that they fucked it up a little bit, because it's definitely not any of these things. But here's why I think they're trying to hang a hat on these three elements. This is the game being a little bit confused, but I think it does some of the things it's hanging a lantern on here very well. So is it The Shining? No, it is not The Shining. But why are they bringing up The Shining? Because it is trying to be a supernatural psychological thriller, which is something you don't see very much in video games, and style and genre-wise, is one of the things that drew me to the game. So is it The Shining? No. Should they have referenced The Shining? No. But that is what they're trying to do. The claustrophobia of this is, I think, my favorite part of the structure of this game. Because first off, it gives you, we haven't even mentioned the weird perspective that this game gives you. It gives you this perspective of looking down into a rectangular room. Everything plays out, well, nearly everything plays out in one main room with a couple of little, like there's a living room with a closet, and then you can also kind of walk out into a bedroom.
It's the world's worst and tiniest apartment.
It's a very tiny apartment. The claustrophobia of that is something I have not seen ever before in, again, one of my favorite tropes, this kind of time loop genre or mini, reference. And so that is something that I think is actually quite terrifying. Imagine if you were in this traumatic situation, and like it's like, what if Groundhog Day, but what if before he could even walk out the door and save the kid that falls out of the tree every morning, Bill got fucking destroyed, right? like what if like Ned Ryerson like started the day hunting Bill down and shooting him in his bed, and he was stuck, So that is, I think, a very effective setup and a part of what makes the pitch for this game really, really good. And then the fragmented structure of Memento, fuck off with that. But they're literally hanging a hat on something that we won't hanging a lantern on here, something that we won't get to until the spoiler break. That is them trying to reach a little bit for some of this sort of psychological thriller genre space that they clearly want to play in, and failing to do it in a way that I think is very is on the money. But it's obvious what they're trying to go for with Memento.
I think we've talked a lot here about their pitch for the game, and in fairness, it brought me in. And I actually think that the first hour or so of playing this game was pretty compelling. So we agree the top-down perspective is unusual and drew me into the experience because it is so contained, and you have this feeling that, like, if I'm going to be spending my entire game time in this tiny space and there's not even that many props, like, how are they going to spin a puzzle game out of this? How am I going to solve a mystery within these four walls? And they do that pretty well for the first hour in a way that I thought like was interesting. And the performances
hours beyond that top-down perspective does start to kind of feel like you're playing the world's most fucked up mod of The Sims.
It and honestly, it has a lot of that Sims animation stank on it too.
Yeah, it does.
Like a lot of these, like
I have expected her to like go and get the cup from the from the put the dishes on the floor while she washed the cup or something like that.
Oh my God. But yeah, because it's in this top-down perspective, first of all, that's a weird perspective to look at any human being from for a length of time. There's... at first, my thought was like, wow, this is a really clever, strange twist, right? Because you're looking from the top down, you can see the entire space, but there's interesting ways that things can be concealed. If there's something underneath something, obviously you can't see it, and there's ways that things can be hidden here. This is a clever choice. And fair enough, it is a clever choice to do this sort of claustrophobic top-down perspective, but it also leads you to weird stuff like, this is a point-and-click adventure game, so you click to walk. You click in a spot, your character walks to that spot. There's a lot of weird pathing issues because this game is full of these very highly staged animations that the game will have these moments that are meant to play out in a particular way, and because of the way the puzzles work, they have to play out in a particular way. So let me give you a quick, for instance. The cop breaks in and he has some words with your wife. Then he knocks her to the ground and puts the zip tie handcuffs on her. That's a self-contained animation that cannot be interrupted. And that's because it's a key part of the story. No matter what happens during that moment, those two characters are going to do their thing. You might be standing right next to them. Maybe you have the knife. Maybe you're holding a spoon.
Right.
Maybe you're holding nothing at all. You cannot do anything to them while they are doing that. And if you click to walk somewhere, you're going to walk around or potentially through them. I can forgive that kind of thing. This is a very high budget game. It feels like it's, they put a lot of effort into making some moments interruptible, but others not. They clearly tried here, but they're definitely meeting this weird conflict of we have these staged moments that have to happen. But we also want to keep things flexible so you can feel like you're trying things.
I don't want to dwell too much on the animation because, I know when we discussed this previously in the Discord, a few people were saying husband clips through wife, animation bad.
Yeah, by the way, did we mention that the weird naming thing here, it never gives the characters a name. James McAvoy does it name him? It's husband. The other character is wife, which I think is very funny. She is wife. This is wife. Hello, wife. And Willem Dafoe is cop. Although the names may change as you make discoveries, right. But you never learn Willem Dafoe is Steve. It's always cop or wife.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting thing about this. That's a stylistic choice. I kind of like that. It makes it weirdly personal, but also impersonal. And I don't think the writing in and around the dialogue and the characters is anything that I necessarily would fault in this game. I think it does a pretty good job.
I think you're trying to hand wave away the animations. I think they are a huge part of one of the problems I have with this game, which is just the simple playability of it. In any time loop video game, we've talked about a zillion of them on this show. Even recently, Overboard is one, arguably. Obviously, the Forgotten City. We played Outer Wilds, and we've probably done others I'm not thinking of, and this is a genre or at least a trope that's something that it can be done very well. And this game didn't exactly lack for prior art to examine. One of the things that is, I think, vital in that kind of game is the ability to, once you know what you're wanting to do, quickly iterate. If you look at the Forgotten City, it does that with Galerius, which is
gosh. We are some Galerius stans.
We really are. And this should really have had a Galerius.
Yeah, for the listeners, Galerius, which I think Galerius is just now added to my game design lexicon. But in the Forgotten City, the first person you meet, literally the very first person outside of the door you step through in the time loop, is Galerius, who is a NPC who you can instantly tell him, hey, could you go and take care of all of these things for me, please? Right. And, he's an interesting character beyond that. He is integral to the story. But what makes him great is that in a game where you are going to reset your progress every day, it is absolutely a godsend to have an administrative assistant who can recomplete all your quests for you and help you get back to the same point that you want to be at to progress your overall story outside the time loop. So
yeah, now especially in that game where the time loop can be way longer than 12 minutes. So I understand, they're not going to have an extra character standing around.
You don't need Galerius here, but if the equivalent of a Galerius in this game would be if somehow
being able to fast forward an animation would be one. Any animation?
God, yes. Any animation, or jump to a particular branch, because now this is part of the fantasy of the time loop in fiction. I have a lot to say about this because this is one of my favorite tropes. But part of the fantasy of the time loop in fiction is that you're going to be repeating the same day all over and over again, and so you gain a level of impossible hyper-competence, right? This is what enabled Bill in Groundhog Day to have, ultimately, that perfect day that released him from the time loop, right? This is what allowed Tom Cruise, character has no name but Tom Cruise, in Edge of Tomorrow to have that final run where he, finally manages to defeat the time looping aliens. Right? So, and when this kind of fiction is working great, it is giving you, the player in the video game, that experience of saying like, oh, I did this run perfectly. Right? I combined my foreknowledge of what the events that I couldn't have no knowledge of, with the just reenacting things that I needed to, and get to exactly the point that I want. So this game does something very different from those, right? So that is kind of similar to the experience that you mentioned, like Mario is in a time loop, right? I'm completing level 1 again, and finally when I get through it in the perfect way, I've moved on to level 2 or whatever. And that's kind of like, I guess, the Groundhog Day trope in a way. But what this game is asking you to repeat over and over again is some real fucked up shit, right? Mm-hmm. So, and so that is part of the horror of this game. Now, we're asked to kind of imagine like this So I have to stop for a moment and talk about psychological horror. What I was hoping for when it comes with the combination of horror and the time loop, okay? Because I have spent. And this is going to be me talking about why I wanted to like this game, what I was hoping for from this game. And also this is me talking on a podcast about things that are other than this game, because I think, in general, I think this is a fringe recommendation for this game.
Don't play it.
What I will recommend, and I'll try and get a link into the show notes, is, essentially anything that really addresses the time loop trope from the space of horror. There was a piece of kind of essentially fan fiction, and I will dig it up and I will include a link in the show notes. That was what if Bill in Edge of Tomorrow. Sorry, they're all blurring together.
That'd be a good one though.
What if Bill in Groundhog Day? What if he was in Edge of Tomorrow? Actually. So the story of Groundhog Day, I know everybody knows it, is that he kind of manages to have this one perfect day where he has repeated the day over and over again, and it has made him a better person, and he has the perfect day with his lady love, whose name I don't remember, and that's how they escape. He creates a perfect day for her. Now, please forgive me for recounting the plot of a piece of fan fiction to you right now. Please.
I'm riveted, Shane. I have no idea what you're talking about, so please continue.
Imagine if he had woken up the next day and the day had reset anyway, right? Now imagine if he'd created that one perfect day and it did not free him, right? That's the horror. That's the start of the psychological horror that's inherent in Groundhog Day. The true horror. Now, the middle of this story is like, what if he were truly trapped in this Groundhog Day for, how many times do you think he repeated the day in Groundhog Day? He clearly read in the movie, in the text of the movie, he read every book in the library, right? So, he must have lived,
Eons.
decades.
Yeah.
Decades. Now, did he live eons? What is left? And the question that entrances me about the intersection of the time loop fiction and horror is what is left of a man after he repeats something like even this boring day in Punxsutawney, but maybe even more so something traumatic like this. What is left of a man after he repeats it billions of times, hundreds of billions of times? What does that turn you into? What comes out the other side isn't even human, I think.
You're really selling me on a game that doesn't exist, Shane.
I know, I really am. And I will link to this wonderful piece of, and it's audio fan fiction, so it'll be great for our podcast listeners.
I can't wait because I have no idea what you're talking about. I think often of there was a lawsuit with the writers of Groundhog Day between them and people who'd made a TV movie based on a science fiction short story called 12:01 p.m. Did you ever see 12:01 p.m., Shane?
No.
So this is another piece. So the sort of prior art of Groundhog Day that literally there was a lawsuit about this was a TV movie about a man who starts resetting the same hour, 12:01 p.m. He's like a businessman, and he just starts resetting
like 12
the same
minutes.
hour. It does. Standing in the middle of traffic, and he just sort of wakes up in the middle of going to his lunch break and repeats the same hour again and again. And I'll spare you all of the time loopy details, but he finally manages to figure out a way to talk to a particle physicist, and over a few loops convince that particle physicist of what's going on with him repeating the same day over and over. And the particle physicist knows exactly what's going on and says, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." And that's the end of it. Yeah. And
So
it's
this-
so
I
bleak.
mean, this-
it is so bleak.
That is. So this genre,
That's the horror. That's the horror.
It's a stretch to call. Yeah, it's a stretch to call this a genre. But like what you've just said, I've never heard of that. But that is a plot line in my favorite thing that came out using this trope in the last few years, which is also a comedy. It was the movie Palm Springs. It's on
Brilliant.
Netflix.
Really, really
Absolutely
good.
brilliant. One of my favorite versions of this ever done. And so what are the versions of this that really work? They're comedies with some of our our age's greatest TV lovable goofs. We've got Bill Murray, we've got Adam Sandberg, right? That's what you need energy wise to make this concept work in a comedic way. But I have never seen, apart from Edge of Tomorrow, which I still love, and is a movie that
I have an
to
Edge
me.
of Tomorrow story that I will save for after the podcast, and we may decide to share.
I keep bringing it up because I don't because I know you will not honestly tell your Edge of Tomorrow story. But I'll just say it's a movie that really speaks to me.
Shane and I have history with the film Edge of Tomorrow that we'll get into.
So
another time.
yeah, this is our listeners are getting to get the real twin experience here. Where we make stupid inside jokes that no one.
We had an in joke that we're not letting them in on. Sorry, listeners.
So you could probably edit that out for their own good, but maybe they will tell it in the next loop. But the version, like I said, the version of this that works as media is this comedic version, right? And I think Palm Springs does a really good job of selling the bleakness of it in a way, because but the thing that I'm interested in with this trope is the much, much, much bleaker, much more horrifying version of it. And this game gets a little closer to that because this game asks you to do something that really no game should probably ask you to do, which is to repeatedly watch the protagonist's beloved wife, who only wants to have a nice romantic evening with him, be absolutely fucking annihilated.
Okay, Shane, you have done a very, very good job of setting out why this game fails to achieve the heights of other great pieces of fiction that deal in these tropes.
The promise that this combination has is what I'm trying to sell you on. Right.
Right. And I was sold from the beginning because I heard I heard the pitch at the beginning, and I am very, very disappointed. But it's not only for that reason. It is also because this is a bad game with bad writing. And there are a number of ways that this game is bad. Shane is making a face, so he doesn't 100% agree with me. But I want to talk about these because so obviously a lot of why this is so bad, a lot of the things that really, really made me hate this game are spoilers. And I'm gonna rip it apart after the spoiler break, but I gotta save that mostly
let's just
after
go.
the spoiler break. But
let's just break it.
Before we do, there are a few things that I can say about it before we hit spoiler break. I already mentioned the weird Sims jank on the animations, and that is an aspect that really bothered me. When you are doing this thing for the 15th time, and you have a time-sensitive action to take, where you need to go into one room, grab an item, go to a different room, grab a different item so that it's not on the table when somebody else goes to look for it. Go and combine those items, put them into another spot, do some parts of this unobserved, and do it by minute 1. Fine. That's a really interesting and clever thing to have somebody do in this context of a time loop game. But then having to do it 30 times?
Yeah.
I went nuts. I was just found it very frustrating, some of the things that this game asks you to repeatedly do, because again, no Galerius, there's no jump to, even though 12 minutes isn't a very long time, there's no shortcuts in this. There's shortcuts in some of the dialogue where you learn new information. So you learned a new way to, say, for example, convince your wife that you are doing a time loop. But that's not actually that important or useful. What's important is that you be able to, for example, juggle 3 inventory items in a way that's very specific and very fast in a point-and-click adventure game kind of format. That sucks. Second thing that really sucks here... Sorry, go ahead.
You tell... I'll give my one last thing that I think is a recommendation for this game that I can share before the spoiler break. And then you tell one more thing that you think should convince people not to play it. And then we'll let them make up their own minds. So you brought up that there are these kind of shortcuts in the dialogue. Now, I actually think that the NPCs and the dialogue that you have with them, especially the wife. So first off, Daisy Ridley gives an excellent performance as wife. I'm sure that Daisy Ridley is, she is great.
She's doing an American accent, and it's fine.
Yeah, I would never have guessed that she was not an American. I know there are lots of people who probably have an ear more finely tuned than I. The thing I'll say about the NPC of wife is that not only is it, I thought, well written and well acted, it is one of the most interactive NPCs you'll find in video games. There's a lot of dialogue. And that NPC is a independent actor. You brought up this whole sequence of these 30 steps that you have to take with the items in the first minute in order to truly master the loop. And, maybe you did that in the first hour. That is the most effective part of the game. And that whole part of the game is exploring the space of possibility of what you can do with the items in the room, but also with the interaction with this NPC of the wife who's present from the very beginning. So, and what she sees and what she does and how she responds to what she sees. I'll just give you some examples of there's a lot of interplay with different cups and cutlery in the place. And if you have moved around the cups, she's going to notice and react to that. And there's lots of things that you can do that this NPC is very reactive to. And, where the emotional state of this NPC matters and all of the different things going on. I think that element, although maybe it didn't work as well for you, worked very well for me, and I was very impressed by it. So that I think is something that if you are curious to see an NPC that seems to have realistic reactions in an adventure game context and has and you're going to have lots of runs to interact with them and really explore what they can do, this is a game where you'll see that. Also, great voice acting.
Yeah. So we're going to have a spoiler break here in a moment. And I will say that structurally, this game has basically 2, maybe 3 big twists. And this game had me up through its first twist. and it does a subversion of the sort of structure of the Groundhog Day style loop within its about first third that it had me up to that point. So really everything else that I have to say about it that didn't work for me comes from, I think I played this game for a total of 6 hours. And everything really that I have that's true complaints about the game are from the final four. And all of it is sort of spoiler blocked. So we're going to go to spoiler break now and talk about that stuff. But if you aren't staying past the spoiler break, here is my suggestions for this game. First of all, I don't recommend playing this game. Shane may feel otherwise, and you're free to make up your mind. It is on Game Pass, so if you have Game Pass, definitely don't buy it on Steam. Go play it on Game Pass. This is a Game Pass game, man.
This is exactly the thing. I do recommend you play this game because I feel like I've had a lot of fun discussing this game, and I would like to talk about it with more people. I don't recommend it because I think it's absolutely the best video game that's out there, but I do think that it's short, and if you have Game Pass, it's free, and I think it's interesting if you're interested in the same things I'm interested in. So
I think that's fair, and I also think like it is a game I've had more fun talking about than playing, and that's not a bad thing. I've had a lot of fun talking about it, even just on this episode and prior. And I've had some fun reading and agreeing with or disagreeing with reviews. So if you're interested in participating in the discourse in that way, sure, why not? But would I go out of my way to play this game if I don't have it readily available to me? I probably would not. So that's where I land on it. It also makes me, because I don't know where else to stick this, it also makes me a little concerned about what I think I see as a sort of a pattern with Annapurna as a publisher lately. Annapurna is a publisher that's like sort of, we've said many times, it's kind of a favorite on our podcast. And I've loved many of their games. I mean, heck, they publish Outer Wilds, and, that gives them a lot of grace, in my opinion. But over the last several games that Annapurna has published, I've noticed a sort of a turn towards a specific approach or format that I think is a bad idea. And I can see where Annapurna arrives at this approach, but I don't think it's serving them well, and I hope that they're reevaluating. And the approach that I'm seeing here is that basically they are finding these promising, long time in development indie games that have been, demoed to acclaim at some point. Games that have been maybe, been percolating, showing up at PAXs and other events, demoed for press, and kind of parachuting in and applying money to them. Hey, great. It's always good for devs to have additional money and time to polish things before they release them. But also their stamp seems to be applying, Hollywood talent or big name voice acting to these smaller scale indie projects in order to bring them to market. That sounds like a good idea, right? If you apply Hollywood talent to a game that may bring in an audience, or at least sort of a marketing angle that maybe the game wouldn't have had prior. Putting Daisy Ridley in the cast of this definitely brought more eyes to it. I think there's reviews in like major newspapers and that sort of thing. So, fair approach. But I also think that, first of all, I don't think the results are speaking particularly well. When I look back at like the games that this is applied to, like they did that with Maquette, and Maquette sort of landed like a wet fart. I Am Dead, similar kind of story, and we kind of had mixed feelings on that one, coming down a little bit on the negative side. Last Stop that just came out, I really wanted to like, because it was from the developers of Virginia, a game that I thought was pretty brilliant, and I really tried, but it was a snoozer for me. I just couldn't get into it, and the gameplay style of it was weird. And it feels to me like if you put this big budget into voice acting, you're doing two things. One is, obviously, the putting big money into the voice acting means that there's being a lot of attention paid, especially in the sort of latter part of development, to that. But it also means that the game becomes frozen in amber as soon as you record that voice acting. Now, I'm not a developer, and I've also, I don't have the inside story on the development of any of those games. But I've got to think that, like, if somebody was going to take a pass at 12 minutes and improve it, focus on what works, take out things that didn't, redo the god-awful ending, which we'll get to. You certainly can't do that if you can't get James McAvoy or Daisy Ridley or Willem Dafoe back in a studio, you know? And 12 minutes or Annapurna, as big as they are not going to get a second day of studio time with Willem Dafoe. He's gone. So, like, I've got to feel like that money and attention would have been spent so much better on a second script pass. I mean, I'm sure this had many script passes over the years it was in development, but like, good God, have Annapurna send somebody in and fix the story, you know, rather than parachuting in Willem Dafoe. Like, this would have played so much better with no voice acting and a lot better script.
Fair enough. I definitely think you're on the right track here with this being something that is designed to get attention for this project. But really, that is exactly the job of a movie star. You know, when you hire a movie star, it's because you want to have a reliable performance and a notable name associated with your project.
But that doesn't.
I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think that you're saying, like, okay, this means that the game is frozen in amber. Like, I don't necessarily think that, like, it's fine. They're going to make more. You know, there's going to be more video games.
True.
You know, we play one every week. So it's not like I am out here saying, oh, man, I really hope they do some DLC.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there was a point in the development process of this game where they could have taken their budget and applied it to improving the story by this is a game that, like, huge numbers of people that played this game had major negative reactions to it, and they could have picked that up and played
this game. How long was this in development though? Like,
for quite a few years.
This was in development for a few years. So, like, does another year solve the problems you see here? I kind of doubt that. There's a reason this has one guy's name on it, Luis Antonio, right? This is I think maybe exactly the thing he wanted to make. So, like, you know, he's made it.
Okay.
It's an Artur piece. It's done. Like, it is what it is.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't know what was in his heart, but if this was his ultimate expression of this, he's sorry, it's bad. Like, it's really bad. Let's go to spoiler break. We'll get into the talking.
Let's go to spoiler break.
And with
that, let's talk about how to find us on the internet.
Yes.
If you are Luis Antonio, don't find us on the internet because, or maybe find me first. But you can find me on Twitter at 8BitShane.
You can find me on Twitter at Raygan K, and the show is on Twitter at _shortgame. We're also at www.theshortgame.net. That's where you'll find all of our links and our contact form, our searchable show notes page if you're wanting to search for through our back catalog. You can also find us on Patreon. So patreon.com/theshortgame. Every one of our patrons gets access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the show. You can tell me what you thought about 12 minutes. I am eager to hear it. You can also suggest
Please
games
do. We
for
need
the
a
show.
Tiebreaker, apparently.
Apparently, yeah. I take the entire internet as being on my side on this one, so
Fair
I
enough.
think I've won. But you know, who's to say? So I mentioned our Discord. All of our patrons can chat with us there. But of course, if you come in at the $5 level, dear listener, you get stickers. So we would appreciate that too. And every one of our listeners also gets access to episodes a bit early, often as much as 3 or 4 days early. So if that's compelling for you, there we go. And here it is, your spoiler break.
And listeners, I just kind of it's while we're on this weird episode where it's just me and Raygan, I will point out the thing that I can never unhear when we go to the spoiler break, which is that Raygan has completely stolen his delivery of "Here it is, your spoiler break" from Craig Kilborn, the Daily Show host that nobody remembers or wants. From before Jon Stewart. So I cannot unhear it. If you ever hear that, tell me, listeners, do you hear it too?
Now I'm self-conscious. I don't know. I know exactly what you're talking about. The moment of zen that he used to do at the end of those episodes. Man, I feel old because how long ago did Craig Kilborn stop doing The Daily Show?
I kind of have to look that up now.
And why do I remember his delivery?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because we've been in a time loop ever since he left The Daily Show in 1998.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
We were 13.
Yeah, Raygan.
We were 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Something stick.
Yeah, something stick. Thank you, Craig Kilborn, for your service. So this game is bad, and let me tell you why. And Shane, you can feel free to interrupt me, as I know you will, because I cannot prevent it. So I just have to lay out what all the twists are, because they're so fucking dumb. Okay, so this is what one of the things that really bothers me about this game, but not even
reasonably good. The following twists are dumb.
Yes.
I think in retrospect, they're all painted quite dumb by the following twists. But the first twist is what?
Oh, yeah, I agree. That first twist is decent. So the first twist, if you're coming in with knowledge of the film Groundhog Day, you know that what I need to do is navigate this situation so everyone leaves, has a hug, and is going about their business in a way that's, leaves with a positive attitude or whatnot, right? So you need to stop the cop from killing your wife. You need to find out what the deal is with your wife's father. So you can find out, you discover the information that she didn't act by, I think you have to do it by torturing the cop, which we'll get to that in a minute. That she didn't actually kill her father. And then you have to prove that to the cop so that she and get the cop to listen to you when you say that. And then everybody sort of hugs and walks away. So you think this is the end of your story, right? They've determined, okay.
Yeah. This is exactly what I wanted out of the game, is this moment when it subverts the Groundhog Day loop.
Right.
By the way, I should have given this before the spoiler break, but I'll just go ahead and give it now. The piece of fan fiction that I was trying to reference is from a podcast called Imaginary Advice. Imaginary Advice is kind of a sci-fi adjacent piece of podcast for audio fiction, where a creator called Ross Sutherland gives these kind of little pieces of writing every episode, just little monologues and different things like that. And many of them are really great, but the one I'm thinking of is called 10,000 Years. And that's the one where it kind of subverts Groundhog Day by kind of asking, what if the happy ending from Groundhog Day had not actually freed Bill Murray's character, Phil Collins? What if it was just another day, and then he was continued to be trapped there for another 10,000 years, right? And this has a moment where it subverts that loop, where you have that perfect dinner with your wife, where she shares. There's even one of my favorite moments in the game is not really a puzzle element, but you are able to kind of experiment with how you should react to the news that your character is going to be a father, right? Like, you can react well and you can react badly to it, And when you have that perfect day, you get through to the end, and then the day resets anyway. And that is the true horror in this game. That is the horror in this game that works.
Yeah, and that happens after essentially 2 hours, right, of my 6-hour experience. Now, I might be that number might be a little off, because I spent a good long while at the end chasing endings. This is a game that has multiple endings that you can kind of go between, and so my 6-hour playtime might be a little bit overstuffed because of that.
I kind of say don't bother. Just get the ending and be done with the game, and shave that extra hour off of the playtime, because you're not getting that much.
Or
out of it.
Stop after that first twist, because that would have been a better game. And I agree with you, Shane, that was a great moment. That was a really good moment, and does show the promise of this kind of storytelling in sort of unnerving you and asking you to think about the horror of endlessness, right? So that worked.
And the claustrophobia of being trapped in this one moment where you know that you're simply going to be re-traumatized over and over again forever. That's great.
That's great. So, okay, moving past that doesn't end the day. So obviously, what is our next goal? Well, perhaps we, in order to stop this loop, we don't just have to prove that our wife is innocent and prevent the cop from killing her and have him go off in search of the true killer. Maybe we have to actually solve this thing right here. And so the next few loops are about trying to apply what little information we have about the half-brother your wife didn't even know she had to the information that the cop has by way of torture in order to try to figure out who might have... Oh, and sorry, we didn't even mention part of the important part of proving that your wife didn't do it is that there's a timeline thing here. This is where one of the plot holes in the story comes up that really bothered me as I was playing through. And I'll mention it because there are a few plot holes in here, but this one just like really puzzled me. Some of the plot holes are explainable by some of the timey-wimey brains are weird stuff that comes into the ending. This one didn't make sense to me either. So you prove to the cop that your wife couldn't have killed her father because the timeline was that she shot her father and then fled, but he didn't die. He actually died several days later. He started to recover when somebody else, the brother, came and shot him on New Year's Eve. And we know that she's innocent because there's a photo on your fridge of her from that very New Year's Eve, which was when your character met her at a party, took this photograph of her. Now, I'll say, jumping ahead a little bit, what I'm talking about the plot hole, so I don't forget to mention it, is that you took this photo of her at a party on the same night in which you apparently shot her father. How did you manage that? How did you manage to shoot him and also be at that party? The very thing that is supposed to exonerate her would exonerate you too.
Well, here is something where I will point to something that this game does that is subtle, that I think it does well, that I couldn't talk about before the spoiler break, and that is that since we're post spoiler break, I kind of have to spoil more for this, but the photo as you get these revelations actually changes. I don't know if you noticed.
I don't think I did. Tell me about that.
All right. So there's many things in the apartment that change as you learn more about the time loop and about as you gain more information and as you continue through the loops. One of them is that the photo changed from one version of the photo to another. And there's nothing particularly unique about them, so it's very easy to miss. But the things like this that I spotted are some changes to, there's a painting in the bedroom that changes. And that's kind of the most obviously symbolic. Like I think it changes from like two lovers to like two lovers.
I think a monster appears in the background or something.
Yeah,
like
a monster
that.
shows. Yeah, when the monster is mentioned, quote unquote, the monster is mentioned. There's a monster that appears in the painting, and there's several other things like this. There's basically every piece of art is one of these as well, except for one that is a Morse code
red herring.
Red herring.
Yeah, you see this Morse code on the wall, and you're like, I'm gonna have to solve that, aren't I? And no, you don't.
And in fact, a lot of the art shit is used as a visual element that is trying to hang a hat on what the game is trying to do, which is the psychological horror elements, because the fact that these things are changing is proof of the fact that this is not the real world, so to speak.
Yeah, it's taking place in the character's head, in a sense.
Oh yeah, there's like a flower that changes on the nightstand that dies or something like that. There's other stuff.
You can water it and it grows across loops. If you put water on it,
that's what that was.
It will
grow.
Okay.
I think I messed around with that, but there's so yeah, we're noticing that there's some things that aren't real here, or that are at least mutable in ways that they shouldn't be.
Okay, here's where things really went off the rails for me in terms of where I decided this is terrible. I do not like this writing. It's really dumb. The first thing that you discover is, after discovering that your wife didn't do it, you're trying to figure out who did do it, and there's a really, I think, stupid connection where the cop remembers that the nanny that the wife's father was sleeping with, her name, the father of the bastard son, the quote unquote monster that we've at this point determined is the person who really killed the father. So that person's mother was named, I don't remember, the cop says.
Dahlia.
Of course, Shane, but the cop doesn't remember that.
He doesn't. He says he doesn't say.
He thinks it's Daisy or a flower name, right? And then you put together that the gift that your wife gave you is a onesie with your mother's name on it, and your mother's name is Dahlia. And then you can show that to the cop in a very fiddly thing that's easy to mess up because you have to show it to him at just the right moment. And if you don't, it's not obvious that you did it wrong, so it's easy to miss that bit, which I found very frustrating. But if you show that to the cop successfully mid-torture scene, because you have to be stabbing him to death while you show him this, of course, otherwise he won't listen to you.
No, I showed it to him after convincing him to help.
Okay.
Not torturing him. I only ever tortured him one time.
I had to do it several times, but in any case, you show him this at a time when he is responsive to you, and he will realize that, yes, that's the name. And so then you, the character, put together, well, there's only the possibility of one woman named Dahlia in the entire universe. This woman, my mother, and this woman who was involved with my wife's father must be the same person. Therefore, I am my wife's half-brother. And not only does that shatter his world, but in order for this sequence of events to have taken place, he would have had to have known that and then forgot. Now, there is an explanation this game wants to offer you for that, but that in the moment is stupid. Because it's bizarre. Because the game wants you to take it at face value that this main character is his wife's brother and forgot that fact. That's dumb.
But not. So in my playthrough, at least my read on it, at that moment where that information is revealed, yes, it is a surprise and a shock to you, but I don't think it's necessarily being spelled out that he knew this before and then forgot. What is it that says he knew this before?
He says it in words. I forget exactly when, but he's like, how did I not remember? How did I not remember that? He says it several times, and I don't know if maybe there's just different.
Well,
order of
how would
events.
you? Okay, I'd have to go back through this twist again
because he figures out that he's because of this, he immediately knows that he's the one that killed the father, and he's like, why did I not remember that I killed her father?
Right. So that obviously is where we start to get into. This is why they're referencing Memento in there. We've talked about the references. He literally walks over the carpet from The Shining, which is the visual reference that everyone loves from The Shining. But the thing that's happening here, to me, is what it kind of starts to remind me of is the more a big trope in psychological horror is memory loss and insanity, right? Because it's a great way to create, psychological horror tends to kind of play in this kind of space of detective thriller, right? Psychological horror is usually something that writers and directors and like to have as the kind of secondary plot line, because it's the kind of thing that's great to have as a result of a reveal, right? And those reveals, the part that makes it psychological is that it is a revelation of that increases kind of a building sense of paranoia, or creates a dissolving sense of reality, right? Where your world is falling apart around you, right? And that's where psychological horror kind of diverges as a subgenre from thrillers, right? So that is what it's doing here. But the reason that maybe that doesn't work here is that we've already done some weird genre shit by having it be a time loop, right? So they're trying to do that, and they don't, for most players, I think, here, stick that landing of the shift of genre from from adventure to time loop to detective to thriller.
I think that's the key thing here is that what you're describing here is like
psychological horror,
a shift in frame of mind where the shift from a time loop is a possibility space where I'm trying to work out what it is that I have access to or can get access to that will give me advantages in the next loop. And that's an interesting space to play in.
Yeah.
But it's only interesting insofar as like you're willing to take everything fairly literally. Because as soon as you step into, I'm in a brain palace, right? I'm in my own dark, twisted mind, which I kind of resisted that interpretation at first because, first of all, I hate that kind of fiction. I didn't like Shutter Island or anything like that. Like, I really dislike when games...
I like Shutter Island. Yeah, Shutter.
Shutter, whatever, you know what I mean. I dislike when anything retreats into it was all a dream, or it was all the dark, twisted fantasies of the main character, or whatever that, pick your trope there. I always dislike when a game or work of art of any kind, movie, whatever, tells you that it is in reality and then pulls that rug out from under you and tells you, you are actually in something far less interesting, the mind of one fucked up dude. And like that, I hate that. So I hate that as a twist. And
Shutter Island had to be made by Martin Scorsese.
Yeah. And even then it didn't rise to the level of anything else of his that I've seen that I liked. Like, it is a bad film in my opinion, but I guess other people, hey, he's Martin Scorsese, whatever. But like, okay, that sucked. Realizing, first off, that this was going for incest horror or, disgust trope, which I find gross, right? And then
I mean, I have movies that I like that have that as a weird plot twist. There's one of my favorite movies of all time. Now I have spoiled a movie that I'd love to recommend for you. Please edit that out.
How dare you?
Please edit that out. No,
that's a good movie. That is a good movie, and I'll have to bleep the title now because that is literally the last moment of that film.
Yeah,
but you're right.
That's literally the twist.
Fair point.
It's as a twist, it's not bad. And here it's what I think it is what the problem that I think I am diagnosing this game with is just too many twists. Every twist wanting to change your perspective of the world, and every twist wanting to like subtly shift the genre in a different direction. It's like if they had the one that really worked was the one we've talked about, where you realize you create, you think you've solved the mystery, right? And in these time loop kind of things, the mystery of what is causing the time loop is intrinsically linked with like solving the problem. And, from Groundhog Day and Palm Springs, from the like more lighthearted versions, with becoming a better person and doing things the right way and creating a better you through this process. And there's that moment where you feel like you've done that, and no, fuck you. There's something else is causing the time loop,
or nothing is causing it, and you're staring into the void.
Right.
But
every successive twist after that one is less satisfying. But in general,
more infuriating.
The puzzles tended to if the puzzles aren't carrying you through here, then maybe that's a good off ramp for you. If you are enjoying the puzzle, and I mostly was enjoying the puzzles. Actually, I did kind of poll the audience for a hint at one point, but I never fully got stuck, and I mostly did like the puzzles. I thought the interaction with all the cups and plates and doing all this dumb shit, as long as I didn't have to repeat it too many times, which I mostly, when I got stuck I asked for help, that part worked for me. First of all, I think my issue there is partly that I didn't ask for help or look anything up, and so if I was in the process of trying to iterate on a particular end of the loop function, right? There's a particular way I'm trying to figure out it, try to explore all of the space of a particular
dangling edge of the possibility space. In order to get back to that spot, I might have to spend 10 minutes many, many times setting up the right set of scenarios. Can't skip the dialogue effectively, can't skip the animations effectively, have to do every step one piece at a time. I found it pretty infuriating, especially by the end. And then there's another aspect that we haven't talked very much about, which is that this started out as something that I was like, I don't see much of an issue here. And then by the end, it did start to alienate and wear on me. And that's how alienating the way this game approaches its violence is. I think we had a whole talk very recently about like games offering content warnings. And that's one aspect to this, is that like, I think it's possible that some folks may have gone into this unprepared for it, but I went into it fully prepared. I went into this knowing this was a thriller. I went into it knowing that it was a violent thriller with on-screen violence, some of it violence against women. And knowing I was prepared for that. But I will tell you that by hour 6, I was really tired of stabbing the cop to death and watching him bleed out and listening to Willem Dafoe's unskippable dialogue, begging me not to kill him and telling me he was on his side. I was tired of doing that. It started to bother me. I was really tired of sitting in the closet and watching the wife get her throat slit. I was just tired of it. And it's hard to say exactly what that is about, but like, I think it's just that like the kind of violence that this includes, it's not when people talk about violent video games, they're generally talking about you as the player enacting a violent power fantasy. And that's never been something that bothers me, but witnessing or enacting cruelty on immobilized people, on people who are helpless, which is the most of the violence that happens in this game. Or even separate from the violence, the sort of casual way that your character uses drugging his pregnant wife with a very likely lethal dose of sleeping pills as a really key central mechanic that you have to do innumerable times throughout playing this game. All of that, the sort of casual nature of that, it started to wear on me in a way that made me uncomfortable. And I don't usually feel very uncomfortable at violence in games, but this made me feel uncomfortable in a way that maybe this game was wanting players to like sit with this violence and feel it in that way. But to me, it only really made me feel that by the time I was already angry at the game for other things, and it already felt useless. So I found that very alienating and uncomfortable, and I did not like.
Yeah, I think the only saving grace for me on that front, because I agree with everything you said there, is that in my playthrough, I don't think I had to repeat either of the two big moments of brutality, maybe more than once each. And I think this game would be the perfect Galerius for this game would be to have a way to jump to the moments just after these things happen, if you are really trying to explore the possibility space of what's on the other side of those moments of brutality. So that's a thing that I think they could really improve on by having that one little thing. There is, I was thinking about it, now that we keep talking about the Galerius of this game, I think the closest is when you are hiding in the closet. There are moments where, like, if you're hiding in the closet or just like sitting on the couch
or on the bed,
you can advance time a little bit. But really what you're jumping to in those moments is these things you have to interact with, which are these, the cop busting down the door. And this is a game that it is almost entirely based on, the repetition of this one terribly violent attack by this cop, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing you're going to see over and over and over again. Now, to me, it was different while I was in that first couple of hours where I was repeating this over and over again, and every time trying to find a way out of it, right? Trying to find my way out of it. But the fact that your way out of it really lies on the other side of being the worst chicken shit possible, of like sneaking in and hiding and watching it all play out, even more violently, while nobody knows you're hiding in the closet like a coward. That I mean, it certainly does something in the story. So I think it is,
as a corollary to that. Like, it bothers me that that there is no. Now, I've just said I disliked that this game forced you to enact violence, but I'm also going to say that the game forces you to witness violence, and during those times it locks you out from preventing it. So there's no way, for example, for the cop to tie up your wife and then for you to spring from the closet and stab him. That's impossible. Once he's begun like putting your wife on the ground, that's it. There's no way to fight him at all, even if you have a knife. Even if you have the jump on him. In fact, it's to the point where it became like darkly comic to me, because you're standing there in the apartment watching him, kick your wife's knees out from under her and put her in zip tie handcuffs. And if you click on him, all you do is stand there and say, "Sir, sir, sir, sir."
Yeah,
Sir?
I think what is very interesting here is like what they've chosen to like opt you out of, because the main character husband goes down with one punch, right? And I think maybe there's reasons for that. They didn't want to animate a bunch of fighting or whatever, but you're not being personally brutalized. Like, by the time the violence turns to you, you're the escape button is hit instantly.
I mean, if you don't get up, you can absolutely have your throat slit. Like, he will stand over you and slit your throat, and you'll see the blood trickling out of James McAvoy's neck. And it's there if you want it.
Yeah, but even that is like, it's a quick thing, right? It's not the same as you hiding in the closet and watching him essentially torture your wife. And it's not the same as the torture you enact on the cop in vengeance and to progress the story. So like, those are two moments that are dwelled on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a reason that lots of people bring this up as a negative in the story. But here is where I'll give my kind of final take on this, is that I think that is the game playing into the thriller elements, and that is what you kind of expect. We've talked a lot about like, this in our recent episode, we had this whole subject on Boyfriend Dungeon about the need to have content warnings, and I do support the idea of content warnings, but it's hard to pick what kind of content to warn about in something that's really based on twists as a genre, like psychological thrillers are. Like, if you were to take a look
I don't think that this requires a content warning, in that, like, they've essentially given you a content warning in the description when they say that you take the role of a husband on what should be a romantic evening with your wife. The night turns into a nightmare when a police detective breaks into your home, accuses your wife of murder, and beats you to death.
For psychological thrillers, here are some of the key literary devices that you have in this kind of thing. Alienating violence is a part of that genre, right? Plot twists are a part of that genre. An unreliable narrator is part of that genre. A MacGuffin, like the watch that we have not even
mentioned up to this point,
part of that genre. And finally, red herrings are a part of that genre, like the frickin' painting with the stupid message in Morse code that I spent 5 minutes trying to find a Morse code chart and translating, only to find out it has just a kind of a meaningless message. So, like, sorry, that's a sidetrack. But this is a game that's leaning into that genre-wise. If that is a genre space you're really going to enjoy, I think you will enjoy this game, and I think this is still something I might recommend for you. But like, it's not for everybody, and it's definitely not for the people that are like, maybe, going into an adventure game expecting this to be like Time Loop Monkey Island.
I wouldn't say I was expecting Monkey Island, but I was not expecting. Yes, I do, of course. The thing, though, that like we haven't talked all the way through the final moments of this game.
Spoil the twist.
Yeah, so you find out that you are the murderer, the one that killed the father, and then you can end the game by using the pocket watch to I forget even how you accomplish this, but you sort of use the pocket watch to like flash yourself back into the moments before the murder of the father. And you can play out. The game takes you to a different scene. It doesn't happen in the time loop or within the apartment. And you're confronting the father, who is also cast with Willem Dafoe. By the way, this is a weird thing. I looked up the cast list on the website, and Willem Dafoe is credited on the website as father, whereas he's not. That's something that you learn deep into Twist territory, which I find a little weird. But anyway, Willem Dafoe is Daisy Ridley's character's father, and you have a moment with him where he is telling you to give up your relationship with your sister. And you have a few different ways that you can choose to play that out. I think it depends on what you choose. There's like multiple different endings. None of them really reveal anything important about the story. You can kill the father and go anyway, which doesn't tell you anything new.
Well, kind of what is kind of revealed here is that this character, we've already learned that he is this, child that was being called the monster by the father, that he was this child of an extramarital affair with a nanny who met his half sister and started a relationship with her, and they were going to have a child. And at that point, that is when he learned about it, because I believe he went to the father to try to get his blessing or something. I don't know. And that's when he realized, right? And that was when the father
presented that's how it played out. Because
choice.
My read on it was that he knew all along that this person was his sister.
Well, no. I think he learned it from the father, because I think we
don't see that moment, though. I don't think.
No, we don't, because the moment we do see is the father, like he's sitting in the father's office, and the father is kind of asking him to make a choice and saying, like, you could just leave, and then I guess you have three choices there. I think it's like, one is you can just leave and not tell her where you went, and that's what the father tells you he thinks you should do, I think. And then I forget what the other two are. One of them is you can kill the father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can tell him that you're going to stay with your sister. And then there's a struggle, and but it's implied that that's the like canon storyline, because that's what makes sense given the other things we already know about like what has happened and the death of the father. I think the canon storyline is the hypnotism ending, which makes it even stupider, because hypnotism is a very soap opera-y trope. Like the final ending that requires a little bit of try. It gives you the choice, and if you basically choose nothing and instead pick a book up off of the shelf in a notable book, because it's the book that your wife has been reading throughout the game, then you can quote a piece of that book back to your father, and you have a brief conversation about the choice to forget. And then he will offer to hypnotize you so that you don't remember anything about your sister. And I think that the implication there, because that sort of explains the like, why don't I remember killing this man portion of the events of the time loop. I think it sort of explains the mind palaciness of it, and the like, I've forgotten these important details of my past element of it, and not remembering that this woman is his sister, not remembering that he's a murderer, etc. I'm not sure what's canon here, but it's one of those endings that's like, I thought pretty unsatisfying, because it's a bunch of endings, not one particular canon ending, and none of them stick for me. None of them really make sense or reveal anything about the story that came before. They all just sort of feel like they're just, hey, that thing you learned about? Here it is happening.
What I really want to compare this to is what I think of as a pretty bad piece of psychological thriller, mysteries, right? There's a movie called Identity, right? And
oh yeah, oh my God.
Spoilers for Identity. Spoiler alert for Identity. Skip ahead a minute, I guess. But this is a movie that has a terrific setup kind of the mystery is very compelling. A bunch of people have been brought together on a dark and stormy night at this motel, and they start to determine like weird things, like they're all from I can't remember the details. They all have the same birthday. They're being killed off one by one.
In very particular ways, like that. I forget all the details too, but like they come from the same place. Like, there's a lot of weird coincidences that connect them.
This is a very, I mean, it's John Cusack is great in it. But it's a really compelling thing where when you have these psychological thrillers, they can be undone by the twist being too much of a metaphorical piece of bullshit, which this is.
I said this
in
game's
Identity,
way too up
it
its
turns
own
out
butt.
that everyone is multiple personalities of like the same guy, and
who's being killed by electrocution on the electric chair, if I remember correctly. And they're like dying because
I don't remember.
His brain is shutting down as he's being killed or something like that.
Yeah,
so everyone are like different aspects of this one fat guy.
Right.
It was a very frustrating ending.
So, and that's an example of an ending that didn't work for me because the like psychological twist is something that doesn't feel like it's a payoff. It feels like it's makes things like less meaningful and less interesting. Like because you realize this isn't happening to real people. Like, and so in 12 minutes, we're also in the final twist ending, more and more realizing that none of this has been real, that this is all in your head, right? And that is the kind of twist that I don't like. The twist that like, hey, all of these impossible things that are happening, like we're already dealing with impossible stuff because it's a time loop, but the more and more impossible shit that you layer on, having your final twist be that none of this was real is just a classic, I think, bad writing thing. And so that is something I will definitely critique this for. Like, I really don't like when it was all a dream, or it was all a hallucination, or it was all multiple personalities in the head of one dying fat guy, or whatever it is. Like, I think that is
and the problem here is that like that problem didn't arise just at the very end when you realize that ultimate truth of the story. The problem began quite a bit earlier when it starts throwing the I forgot that I was an incestuous murderer angle at you, because then you're left at that point fairly early in the story at about the 2-hour mark, I think, or maybe 3. Then you have to choose between either none of this is real and I'm going to disengage from the story because it's no longer it's lost its weight, or this writing is really dumb and full of holes. Or both, but like that was like I was left with that choice about halfway through this game, and I was kind of still propelled through it by the inertia of the initial couple of hours that were pretty decent. But like, oh man, it's bad. It's real bad.
When you have this kind of twist, right, where some impossible element is revealed that shows like, hey, this is in this character's head, like you can't toe that line, right? It's fun as a twist where it's a reveal, and then we can say, okay, for the rest of this story, we're dealing with things that are metaphors, right? But this game doesn't do that. It tries to toe that line and partway reveal it, and then save the full reveal as a final twist. And that doesn't work because there's going to be half of your audience that sees it as a plot hole and gets pissed off, and then the other half of your audience doesn't notice it and then gets to the end and experiences the twist, the second twist, as a fun twist, right? But if you show your ass, it's gonna fall apart for half your audience, and
maybe more.
And so, like, to some extent, in movies, this kind of thing works because when you have like a 2-hour movie, the things that don't really hold together in your story only have to work until the audience walks out of the theater. But in a game like this, people are going to be playing it it's 6 hours. People are going to play it in multiple sessions. When somebody gets that first big payoff and they walk away from your game and they come back to it, maybe they're going to walk back and they're like, hey, what was going on? Wait, now I've had time to think about it. And what was quote unquote going on doesn't make any sense, right? So, part of part of what actually worked for me is in this game is literally that I didn't totally put it together when I had the opportunity in the second act, right? I got all the way through to the end. I got that second twist and I was like, oh, hey, now that's a twist. But then I'm looking back at the game, I'm like, man, I got to take some notes about this. What was it that actually happened? And that's when I was like, wait, this doesn't make any fucking sense. But that's fine. Shutter Island doesn't make sense. Like, there's shit tons of plot holes in this kind of thing. Because when you're telling a story that isn't, quote unquote, really happening, like, there's going to be plot holes because it's not really happening. And you want to kind of tease your twist out and let your audience have the opportunity to feel clever when it comes around. So, anyway, any final thoughts you want to share on like what this game did well in its story and its writing, what it didn't do well?
I think, Shane, you've done a wonderful job of laying out what this game was trying to do, and in some ways, you've convinced me that it has done some of it slightly better than I would have thought the minute I set my mouse and keyboard down on this. But I just can't love this game. I can't even like it. It made me angry. The writing on this is exactly like the kind of thing that I just cannot stand. And it made so much worse by the fact that like I didn't find out that I thought this game was like this shitty until I was fairly deep into it. Like it's also partly that like I really had high hopes for this. First of all, 12 minutes. You want to attract the short game to play your game, name it after a short duration of time. I was excited. I also realized Annapurna is publishing this. Wow, that's great. Oh, this has been a long time in development. Sometimes those sort of like long in development auteur pieces that get a nice kickstart of money from a big publisher turn out great. That's a good sign. Time loops. So exciting.
Dude puts his name on the game. If you're a developer out there, put your name on your game.
Love
it. Like most developers only get a chance to make a game once, right?
I certainly understand why folks go the studio name route, and that is, of course, that like it's a person doesn't make a game. Teams of dozens or hundreds do. Like you look at something like Chicory that's made by an incredibly tiny team, and they did list everybody's name rather than listing a studio name or coming up with a cute moniker. And that's a pretty long list of people to fit into the who made this game box on Steam or the itch.io page or what have you. And so I certainly understand why that is the convention in game development. On the sort of micro indie side, people do use just their name or nom de plume. And, sometimes there's also a sort of fake it till you make it. I'm a solo dev, but I have a studio, quote unquote. So like that doesn't bother me, although I do like to see it done this way, even in situations like this where there's a big team and you have to scroll down.
That's what we want. Like we want these games that are tour pieces, and that's exactly what something like why we like Annapurna.
But like all that is to say, like that I was setting all that up to say that like I was very disappointed by this game ultimately because it checked so many boxes for me in terms of like things I get hype about. I'm not somebody who invests tons of, I don't get hype. I try not to pre-order games. We play a game a week on this show. There's no time for me to be like looking 10 months ahead and getting hype about something. But like this was a game that I really thought was going to be for me and really thought was going to be for the show. And coming away from it, all I can say is that this had good ideas. It had some good execution, but it had a lot more bad execution and it had a lot more bad writing. This needed a different writer. If this was going to be a good game, and I think there are bones here that could have made a very good game. I think it would have needed to eject the back half of the game or more. And I think it would have needed a complete rethinking. I think you could make a wonderful game in this mode that took the more Groundhog Day comedic style approach. Like if this game had a sense of humor about itself, and maybe was like 50% less violent and, just a different vibe. I think that I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. I think if it was trying to be this serious, I think it just needed better subject matter. Like it just needed better subject matter.
This is, I don't really think that the subject matter is necessarily the problem. I think this is a lot closer to the ideal version than it doesn't need to be completely rethought. I think there's a lot of good here, and I think if the back half were a more satisfying experience, this is just me being a backseat developer,
that's what we do.
Writer, but when we have that twist, if we had had more of a fundamental change in the game and leaned more into interacting with things as the metaphors that they've now been revealed to be, than as just like moving the same 3 cups around, like meanwhile like reenacting and playing out the same exact things and finding out a little bit more, but mainly stuff we already knew, that really would have changed. I would really love the version of this game that spends 2 or maybe even 3 hours trapped in this room, and then in the last third like explodes out into like metaphorical Psychonauts territory, and uses that as a payoff for that. But instead, this isn't a game that really has that payoff. It is a game that I think has lots to recommend it, and if you can get this on Game Pass, and if you can get this on sale, I think it's worth playing, and I especially think so if you liked the execrable movie Identity from 2003, which unaccountably has over 70% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh man, that's a weird one. All right, I think that's all we have for tonight. I think I've said everything I have to say about 12 minutes, and I never want to think about it again. How about you, Shane?
Welcome back to The Short Game, a show about short video games that respect your time. I am your host,